So I'm going to walk through graining a litho stone. The surface of your stone, when you get it, may have a drawing on it, or will likely have a drawing on it that we need to resurface in order to make the stone sensitive to grease again, and to remove the old image so that that old image isn't printing. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to see if the stone is indeed level. So we're using the straight edge here, which is the metal bar that you'll see at the sink, and a piece of newsprint. So we want to test and see if that piece of newsprint slides loose like you see here, or if it is tight and snug like it was in the middle. So if we have this straight edge and it's completely level, if the area is low, it means that, and the newsprint is sliding out, it means that that part of the stone is low. If it's really snug, it means that it's either level or high. So we can see on this stone that it is loose on the edges and tight in the middle, which lets us know that the middle of the stone is high and that the edges are low. So when I'm graining, I need to focus on the center more than I would on the edges. If you're getting a stone that somebody else already used, that stone should be level in theory, but it doesn't always happen, and it's very easy for these things to get out of whack, especially when we're using the lower grits. So here we have a different stone that still has an image on it. So first I need to make sure that there's no dirt or dust or goop on here, so I'm just rinsing off the surface of the stone first. I'm going to be using the levigator for this first bit, so I rinse that off as well. We start with 100 grit to remove the image and to level out the stone. So I'm going to sprinkle on some of this grit. You'll notice that after I rinsed it off with water, I pushed off some of the excess before I put on the grit, so the grit just doesn't pour off. Then I'm using the momentum of the levigator to kind of move throughout the whole stone. I'm graining the entire surface, keeping a very even pattern the whole way through. I want to make sure I'm hitting every area of the stone the same way. The grit works very much like sandpaper. So the 100 grit we're starting with is a very coarse grit, and then we're going to move through finer grits throughout this process until we have a nice smooth surface that we're drawing on. Because to start, we're trying to take off large amounts of stone. Later on, we want that surface to slowly get smoother and smoother, because if we drew on a 100 grit stone, that stone is going to be really coarse. Our drawing is going to end up really coarse. So what grit we take the stone down to kind of dictates the way that the drawing is going to look. So typically we're going to go all the way up to a 240 grit or a 220 grit as kind of a nice surface. Once you start getting higher, your likelihood that you're going to scratch the stone is going to become higher. So I keep graining until it becomes kind of sludgy and kind of sticky, as you see here, and then I'm going to rinse off all that excess carborundum, get it off my hands, get it off the levigator, and I want to do a really thorough job of this, especially in between different numbered grits. So I'm rinsing it off the edges as well as the surface. You can see that the image is still present on this stone, so I know right off the bat that I have to grain longer. So the image should be completely gone from the stone. You might see a little bit of a ghost image, and as long as that ghost is gone when the stone is completely dry, I find it acceptable to draw on stones again at that point. But if you can see it when the stone is dry, it most likely will show up in your new image as a ghost within your image, and you don't want somebody's old image showing up in yours, or one of your old images showing up in your next image. So I'm going to continue with the 100 grit here, keeping that nice even pattern, making sure I'm hitting all those areas evenly until that image is gone. And I will do this as many times as is necessary to get rid of that image. Typically with most drawings, you're probably going to get rid of it after 4 or 5 passes, depending on what the previous drawing used. as part of their drawing material. So if something is extremely greasy, it might have sunk further into the pores of the stone, and it might take it a little bit more graining to get rid of. As well as getting rid of the image, as I mentioned, I'm also trying to keep the stone level. So the 100 grit that we're using here will also be used to take care of any issues if we have a high point on the stone or a low point in other areas. It helps us kind of determine where we're going to focus our efforts and energy. Sometimes the levigator will not be appropriate for this. Sometimes we might have to use a small stone to hit a small area. If we have like one little tiny area of the stone that the levigator would cover too much, we would use a stone-to-stone method for graining, which you will see in a minute or two here in the video. You might also find that the levigator is a little bit awkward to use at first. You are not physically spinning it in a circle as it appears. You're really just kind of guiding the levigator along. So you're using the natural momentum of the levigator itself to just kind of continue to propel it through. If the levigator method is really awkward for you, it is possible that you can use the stone-to-stone method, which is a little bit easier to control in your hand, and it feels a little bit more natural. So I've gotten this stone down to where there's no image that I can see left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeegee off the stone. I'm going to fan it dry, which you're going to see in rapid succession here. And I can either let it fan it dry, or I can just let it naturally dry. By the time it is dry, then I'm going to check all those level points again. If it is snug all the way across the bar when I tilt it in both of these directions, then I know I'm good to proceed. If not, I need to address some of those high or low areas. So we're going to assume that the stone was completely level. And so what I want to do before I move on too far through my grits is I want to file some of these edges down. So if you have really crisp, sharp edges, that's not going to be great when we're rolling it with the leather roller slater. A lot of ink will catch on the edges, and we'll get a lot of scumming and issues on those edges. So I need to file it down to where I have a nice little 45-degree angle, and my little final touch, if I want or choose, will be to use some of the pumice stone along the edges as you just saw there. And that'll file it down to a really nice smooth edge. Then I'm going to move up through my grits. So typically once we have the stone level, the image is gone, then I can move on to my 180, where I'm going to do this and repeat this like 2 or 3 times. So you can see it once again, water, rinse it off really well, move that grit around so it doesn't clump up. And now I'm going to be using the stone-to-stone method. So I'm also still trying to make sure that I hit all those areas evenly, and that that I'm not neglecting any one area, so I'm not creating any high spots or low spots anywhere. So it's important with the stone-to-stone that you're kind of moving with the stone so that you're not putting too much pressure on your back or any sort of area. But what you're going to imagine there is that I did that 2 or 3 times, 3 rounds, and then I'm moving up to my next grit, which is 220 here, which is the grit that I'm going to stop at. I find that the stone-to-stone method actually really helps prevent scratches. So scratches are something that I haven't really talked about here, but if you get a scratch in the stone, that will show up as a white spot in your image. So the only solution to get rid of those is to go back down basically to your 100 grit. So you just saw me blow through the 220 grit. I don't see any scratches. I want to get that stone completely dry, so I use newsprint to blot some of it off. And then I fan it dry, and then now my next step is transferring an image.